Okay, today we're going to talk about the introduction to the reflex theory and the introduction to PDTR. This is good for the students who are going to take PDTR courses later, who are planning to take PDTR courses. It's good for the practitioners, the existing practitioners, to understand the overall theory of the reflex activity and to understand the neurophysiological aspects of manual therapy in general. So what we're going to talk about, we're going to be talking about 2 hours, and we're going to discuss the aspects of manual therapy in general. What is the mechanism of manual therapy? Then we're going to talk about stimulus, about activity of central nervous system, about reflex activity, reflex development, about myostatic reflex. We're going to try to cover all the aspects of main activity of central nervous system, how it gets the information, how it integrates the information, and what is the response. Then we're going to talk about altered reflex activity and what happens if the normal reflex activity goes wrong. Before we start talking about PDTR and neurophysiology, we have to ask the question, what is the mechanism of manual therapy in general? We have many practitioners, we have hundreds of different techniques. So what do we do? How does it work? How can we describe the effects of manual therapy to other clinicians and to patients? When we perform a treatment, what happens? How do we know what we do, how we do, and what we expect? What is responsible for any observed positive effect? And how do we as practitioners diagnose a cause of the dysfunction? So those are very important questions, and many people tried to answer these questions, and they wrote many articles. In the end of the presentation, we're going to have about 100 references of people who studied manual therapy and who tried to understand what do we actually do. So, what we do in manual therapy? We do tissue mobilization, we do tissue manipulation, we do passive treatment techniques, we treat pain mostly, limited range of motion, sometimes we treat visceral problems and even some metabolic problems. What are manual therapy's techniques? They're mostly learned techniques. So what does it mean? Somebody showed us a technique, and then we apply it on our patients and we see what happens, if it's going to work or if it's not going to work. But whatever we do in manual therapy, the base of it is mechanical stimulation. So whatever we do with our hands to the patient, we do traction, we do compression, we touch, we stretch, all of those are mechanical stimulus. And the very important point that all mechanical stimulus would cause a neurophysiological effect. Some mechanisms of the manual therapies were described and proposed as a theory. So here we can see that mechanical stimulus goes to the tissue, and then we can observe some results. For example, if we do massage, we can see the partial improvement, and probably the patient will feel temporary release. But normally, the mechanical stimulus goes through the tissue, it goes to the peripheral nervous system, then it goes to the spinal cord, and that's where all the things start to happen. The mechanical stimulus could cause autonomic response, could cause endocrine response, and could cause any kind of cognitive and emotional responses. Then all this information is going to go to pain modulation system, and we're going to get a pain relief. This is a model which was proposed by Bilovsky in 2009. This is just a model, it doesn't prove that it works exactly the same, but we can see how complicated the mechanism of any mechanical stimulation. So we've got two main aspects of manual therapy. First is mechanical stimulation. And we observe some biomechanical changes after the manipulation. And we don't get long-lasting effect. The patient should return like once a week to do the same procedure. And sometimes the previously gained benefits, we lose them. We are not really sure what we do with the manual stims. And we're not sure if they're effective or if they're not effective. We try and we expect to get a good result. And because all the manual therapy practitioners are different, they have different approaches, we all get different kind of results. Of course, in many therapies, they claim that it helps, and we can see the patients who improve. Some improve with time, some improve even immediately. But we cannot really predict the outcome, and we cannot explain what exactly we do when we apply the stimulus. What do we expect? And there is another article which was written in 1994, which said very clearly that the reason for symptomatic relief produced as a result of mechanical treatment aren't known for certain. And there are many other articles which say, okay, we do the manipulation, but we've got no idea what's happening. Then the most important for us, and that's what PDTR is dealing with and what PDTR is researching, is neurophysiological mechanism of mechanical stimulation. And again, in the article which was written by a medical doctor in the University of Florida, he says that neurological mechanism of manual therapy accounts for a complex interaction of peripheral and central nervous systems. And it involves receptors, it involves spinal cord regulation and supraspinal mechanism. What does it all mean? Neurology talks about function, and physiology is the study of a living system. Neurophysiology studies the functioning of the nervous system. So what is the word function? What does it mean? The function is a relation between input and output. In any manual therapy, any mechanical stimulus is going to be input, so that's information which is going into the nervous system, and output is any kind of response we get from the patients. What are responses? The skin can go red, the range of motion could decrease or could increase, the person can have some sympathetic reaction, complaints of pain, discomfort, whatever. All of those things, they're outputs. Most of the outputs are automatic and they're called reflexes. For example, if we withdraw from something hot, we withdraw immediately. We touch, immediately we have the muscle activity which withdraw us from the dangerous source before even we can consciously process this information. And this is an example of withdrawal reflex. And basically we've got two main streams of information flow. One information is coming from down to the top, from external environment, from our internal environment to the nervous system, and then we get a top-down response from central nervous system to periphery. And mostly we communicate with the world through our muscles. We need to talk, we use muscles. We need to breathe, we use muscles. We need to do any kind of actions, we use muscles. So this is our motor system. So again, we have input, which is sensory. The brain processes the information and generates a certain response. So all kind of stimulus are input. All kind of responses are outputs. It works in intracellular levels as well, so all our immune and endocrine system is based on signaling, meaning it's regulated by the special information which biochemical substances send, and then the reflex works and some other biochemical substances are released into the blood, and that's how we balance our homeostasis. So responses could be any actions of the body, muscle contractions, blood secretion, brain activity, and examples could be movement, conscious movement or subconscious movement, gland secretion like salivation, respiration, adrenaline flow inside the body, brain reactions, or like even brain waves which we measure with electroencephalogram. Okay, so this is the nervous system, and that's our main regulatory system in the body, and we have central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. So all the information from outside of the world is going to travel by the cords of peripheral nervous system and then eventually get into our central nervous system for processing. Without nervous system working properly, we cannot walk, we cannot breathe, we cannot talk, we cannot do any kind of activities. And the primary function of the central nervous system is to coordinate each and every activity which takes place in all parts of our body and regulate our behavior and interrelationship with the environment on all levels of functioning. It could be physical, biochemical, emotional, cognitive. So it's called central nervous system control absolutely everything in the body. So how does it happen, and how does central nervous system deals with information? First, it detects and receives any valuable information from the environment by special sensors. Those special sensors called receptor, and we call it input. Then the interpretation happens on the different level of central nervous system, where brains make a decision and produce the planning for the response. And then response is mostly to adapt, consciously or unconsciously, to the changing environment. And we can have the motor, vegetative, or sensory output. Our central nervous system is limited to the modality of the senses we have and stimuli intensivity. We cannot recognize the stimulus if we don't have appropriate sensors, meaning that we can hear in the range of 16 to 20,000 hertz. Then if the sound goes above this frequency, we either feel very, very strong pain or we don't hear the sound. We can really hardly cope with the volume of maximum 120 decibels. And if we have a volume over 80 decibels for a long time, we would be deaf. We cannot hear ultrasound as well. Then we can see, so we can sense electromagnetic waves in the range of 400, 150 nanometers. We can see in X-ray spectrum, or we cannot see in infrared spectrum. So we're very, very limited. Then the information is all various signals which we receive constantly, 24 hours. And our central nervous system is detecting those signals from internal, external environment 24 hours, 7 days a week. So we can say that we live in a signal matrix, and we have to adapt to the constantly changing signaling from the outside. And we just used to that we see with our eyes or we hear with our ears. It's not like that. We don't see actually with the eyes, because all the light which goes into the retina, then it gets to the occipital cortex, where it gets interpreted, and that's quite a really complicated process, and that's how the brain makes sense out of what we actually see. So we can say that it's a big illusion, because brain constructs a reality based on its capacity to decode the signal from incoming environment. Just for the example, if we try to build a robot, and what we decide to put some sensors, like we put the touch sensor on his head, we'll put light sensor into his eyes, and smell sensor into his nose. And this robot is programmed to a certain range of stimulus. So for example, we can see it only in infrared spectrum. In the human being, it's more or less the same. The nature provided us with the eyes, ears, taste receptors, touch receptors, and many senses which allow us to make sense out of the world. So we are also biological robots who detect the environment just by the senses which we have. The model of the human being wasn't upgraded for a long time, So a few millions years ago we had the same and no patch was added. For example, if we could see an X-rays, we would have seen everybody like that. So we wouldn't have any problem with fat issues or beauty industry, nothing. We would have seen just the brains. If we could see in infrared spectrum, maybe we would have seen auras. Maybe the world is not like we see it at all. But our senses, it's the only source of information. So, human senses and human receptors. The senses which are built into humans are called sensory receptors, and sensory receptors would detect the specific type of input. It could be mechanical, it could be electromagnetic, mechanical waves such as sound, chemical such as taste or smell, and convert it into electrochemical code, which would be sent to central nervous system. When somebody touches us, we learn that it's a touch sensation. But in reality, we have sensors which detect the mechanical stimulus. Then, by the sensory cords, we'll send the information to the spinal cord. Then, on the level of spinal cord, it's going to be a decision. It's a completely automatic decision, not conscious at all. But it's going to be a decision how to react. If it's dangerous stimulus, if it's not dangerous stimulus, whether to proceed it further to supraspinal levels, or maybe to block it. And those areas of the body which detect different stimulus, they're called receptor fields. And in PDTR, we work with receptor fields, and we work with particular stimulus which might cause altered reflexes in the organism. So, what is a stimulus as such? Stimulus could be any object or any event that elicits a sensory or behavioral response. It could be conscious or subconscious. Its any change is registered by senses and constitutes the basis for perception. So our perception is working constantly. We perceive the world around us thanks to the senses which could detect the stimulus. In physiology, a stimulus is a detectable change in the external or internal environment. And the ability of organism or organ to respond to external stimulus is called sensitivity. When a stimulus is applied to a sensory receptor, it normally elicits or influences a reflex via stimulus transduction. So we know already that the reflex is an automatic response. Any nervous system would perceive stimulus as either dangerous or neutral or positive. And the normal behavior of any central nervous system is to avoid or overcome dangerous stimuli or approach positive stimuli. And it works with us every day. If somebody is nice to us, we approach, we like him, or we make friends, and so on. If somebody gives us bad stimulation, lies to us, does something really nasty to us, says something really bad, then we withdraw. So we try to avoid the contact with any negative stimuli. This is a conscious response, which we consciously understand, but exactly the same way the subconscious regulation of the central nervous system is regulated. Automatically, we're going to be trying to avoid the negative stimulus and approach to the positive stimulus. Because of different education and learning and different environmental conditions, different people would perceive the same stimulus in a different way. For example, for somebody, spider is an absolutely nice, lovely creature, but some people have serious problems and they have phobias. And they have a really, really strong sympathetic reaction with fear, with panic attacks, and with some other really big problems. So it's completely different. Any central nervous system has a tendency to remember the negative stimulus much more than we remember positive stimulus. So it's necessary for survival, because any animal, any creature should learn, because it's really dangerous for any kind of creature to be in a dangerous environment, and if in time the creature will not react properly at the dangerous stim, it could die. So what kind of stimulus we can have? All the stimulus are taken into the nervous system by special cords, and there are 4 types of cords. Some are fast cords and they carry the signal very fast. Other cords carry the signal not so fast. We have proprioception. It's stimulus from muscles and joints and ligaments. And all this information from our joint muscles and ligaments go to the nervous system, letting the brain to calculate our position in the space, make sure that we don't fall down, make sure that we can properly do the movements. Then we've got a visceral stimulus, and they come from the organs, and they can be mechanical and chemical. For example, when the stomach is stretched enough, then we don't want to eat anymore. And then we've got so-called nociception fibers, which are activated when tissue is damaged or inflamed. And this is called nociception, and it also activates our arousal system, so we are aware that something wrong is going on. And nociception is involved in any kind of pain sensations, but it's not the same as pain itself. But nociception will advise the central nervous system that some tissue are damaged or inflamed, or something wrong is happening. Most of the incoming stimulus are unconscious. It's about 95%, which we don't get at our conscious mind. And of course, the 95% of responses is going to be reflex, meaning automatic. We're not aware of that. So in this picture, we can see how the damage of the tissue will cause the pain sensation, and we can see that this is the skin, this is the epidermis, and this is the stimulus, something pinpricked our skin. So by the nerves, it's going to go to the spinal cord, and then it's going to go to the brain, and it probably is going to reach our conscious mind, and we're going to have the pain sensation. So as we said before, we have different types of fibers which conduct the signals. And some conduct the signals very fast, which means about from 30 to 120 meters per second. And some of them are really slow, from like 3 to 15 meters per second. And we have, for example, the afferent information from the skin and from the joint is very, very fast. So if we move the muscle, so we move the joint, so we change the position of the body, the signal to the brain is very fast, and that's why we can adapt to different movements. We can do different kind of sports, we can run, and we can do ballet, because the signal is fast enough and allows us to adapt. So this is another table which shows connection between input, processing, and output. So again, we have all kind of incoming stimulus, which is stimulus from our viscera, from our proprioception system, from exteroception, from our senses like eyes, like ears, smell, taste. Then it goes to the central nervous system, where it's being analyzed, compared, and decision is made what to do with this information. And this decision is made consciously and unconsciously both. And then the output is going to be the reflex activity, it's going to be posture movements, it's going to be automatic responses, it's going to be homeostasis regulation, it could be emotional responses, it could be cognitive responses, and in higher behavior levels, it's going to be motivation, it's going to be learning, targeted actions, and self-control. So sensory receptors, we've got different kind of sensory receptors. We can feel touch, we can feel heat, cold, pressure, smell, taste, and all this information going to go to the central nervous system. Only 5 to 8% of all the information which coming from the outside environment is going to reach our cortex. That means that 95–92% of our life is totally unconscious. And we have, for example, 75% of incoming information, which is afferent, and the response is going to be about 25, which is afferent. So consciously we process 5% of the world around us. It's nothing. Now, perception. Our perception of the world is based, of course, on the information of our sensory system. As we said already, the brain do not see. If we get the wrong information, or it's processed in the wrong way, we would respond in a completely different way. When some people say, okay, you know the reality, and you have to see the reality, we don't see the reality, because our reality is constructed by our brains. Sometimes it matches the reality of other people, sometimes it doesn't. And that's why we've got so many different interpretations of the information. For example, we're going to talk about later about how the actual word is perceived. Okay. For example, when we see the flower, which senses get the information? First, our eyes, they get the visual information, so the change of light and shades, and process the visual information. Then we smell the flower, and this is another channel of information. Then we touch the flower, and that's the tactile sensations, and it's a different channel of information. Then we could have some memory associations. And for example, if somebody who is very close to us gave us some flowers, it's going to be good associations and good interpretation. If we have some bad memories associated with this particular flower, then we might have the withdrawal and negative sensations. Then we might think about semantic knowledge of this flower, so it's a plant, classification of this plant. And all the different channels deliver the information in parietal cortex where the association happens. So the brain tried to put all information together, and then it's coded in a certain word. For example, it's rose, in different languages, different words. But this is basically a word is a coded stimulus, is a coded name for all this association of the stimulus. And of course, when we say the code word rose, we could have completely different interpretation depending on what our channels supplied to our nervous system and what the interpretation was made. So it's completely different for different people. Then, for example, with somebody talking to us, again, our central nervous system receives the information through different channels. We see the opponent, we hear the words, we process the words, so we have visual, auditory information, we have touch information, and then we react almost every second because we process information very, very fast. But it's very, very complex activity of the brain. So once our central nervous system receives the information, it will identify it, differentiate, and synthesize it. And to identify it, the central nervous system should be able to compare the incoming information with the existing data in the memory. Because when we were babies, we didn't know all those variety of stimulus. We didn't know the words, we didn't learn the sensations, so we didn't know what touch was. And then subconsciously we were learning the definitions, we were getting used to the world, and slowly we learned all the variety of stimulus, and now we can manipulate them. But when we are born, we absolutely know nothing. And the central nervous system learns all the time and creates a links. And again, the link could be created between a spider and my perception as a, okay, spider is nice, it's not dangerous, it's a nice creature, very interesting, I would like to study it. and another person would perceive a spider as a monster, as really dangerous, and have many reactions. So it's absolutely different. But the most important thing is that most of interpretation happens absolutely unconsciously and automatically. From the childhood, we learn to react. And of course, when we're babies, we cannot interpret the information by thinking, by analyzing. So we get the stimulus and we get the reaction. And that's how we operate, and then we start learning how to interpret and how to analyze the information. For example, the little baby who sees the fire for the first time in his life, he would be interested in the fire. He would try to touch it, because his visual system doesn't process any dangerous information. He doesn't hear any dangerous sound. And then he's trying to touch because he's not familiar with the stimulus. As soon as he touches the fire, his nociception fiber will immediately take a signal to his nervous system, and when the signal gets to the spinal cord, the little baby will withdraw. Then it's going to go further to his conscious mind. He's going to feel the pain and he's going to cry. Next time, his central nervous system would learn that it's not a great idea to touch the fire. So after input, we have interpretation. Interpretation is very complicated, and it's based on our ability to create the neuronal links. So the connection between two neurons is the link, and it's called the primitive memory. And again, for any kind of stimulus, the nervous system would put a label. It's a good stimulus, it's a bad stimulus, it's a neutral stimulus. And this is going to be our guidance in all our life. Again, the same happening not only in conscious level, when we understand what's going on, it happens in subconscious level. So we are not aware of our own nervous system, what's good and what's bad for it, because it withdraws, and sometimes we have a conflict between the conscious mind. We think, okay, it's not dangerous, but for some reason our body doesn't want to go, doesn't want to approach, because for our subconscious mind is absolutely different interpretation. And we learn all the time, and learning is the main adaptation for the whole life. After the input and interpretation, we have output. And output is happening on different levels of regulation. It could be biochemical reaction, it could be vegetative reaction, it could be motor reactions. And we can detect this reaction consciously. For example, when we're scared of something or we're anxious, our heart starts beating faster, and we detect this stimulus. Do we choose? Do we order, I want my heart to beat faster? No, we don't. It starts beating faster, it's a fact, and then the conscious mind perceives it and has to deal with it, has to find a solution how to adapt to some stimulus which causes this heart beating. And the Russian physiologist, who actually was the first one who was dealing properly with all the reflex activities, Ivan Pavlov, he stated that 95% of our reactions are unconscious. In other words, it's a reflex and automatic reaction. And this is very important for all kind of manual therapists. Because, okay, of course we work with the conscious mind of the patient, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of influence. But mostly when we do any kind of stimulation, mechanical stimulation, or maybe we do physiotherapy with heat, we put cold, our central nervous system reacts automatically, and we should be able to explain, to predict, to analyze, and to study those reactions. Because any kind of stimulus is going to cause the alteration of reflex activities on any level. Again, on physical level, on endocrine level, immune level, level of homeostasis regulation, and so on. So it's very important for us, when we do the stimulus to the patient, to understand why we do the stimulus, what do we do it, where we apply the stimulus, and predict how the patient would react, and understand what's the reason of those kind of stimulus, why we do that. And in manual therapies, like in osteopathy, in applied kinesiology, in different kind of myofascial release techniques and so on, we just do the stimulus and we don't think, we hope it's going to help. But we don't know exactly how it's going to affect the reflex activity of the body. We normally we react all the time, but it's different how we consciously react and how we react subconsciously. We are doing hundreds of different gestures during the talking, during sitting, during learning. All the time we have different stimulus, which we do, for example, we touch our face, we change our position. Even when I stand here, I do millions of different movements, and that's absolutely subconsciously. It's my nervous system trying to adapt to the light, to the fact that I have to look here, look there, switch the buttons, and I'm talking on the camera, and etc. So all the time my system trying to adapt subconsciously. Yeah, and the main target of central nervous system is to produce the best adaptation for the organism. This is how it works, and it's a very good table. It's a little bit complicated, but it shows what happens after we get the stimulus. So it's basically summarize everything what we talked before. First, the stimulus is applied. Receptors detect the change in the internal or external environment, because if there is a touch, there is a change, and that's how we detect. Then it's going to go, for example, to somatic sensory receptors and going to deliver to the central nervous system the sensation which was caused by the touch. So maybe it's warm sensation of heat, it's self-touch, or maybe it was a little bit of pressure. All the sensations going to go up. Then the information is going to get to the central nervous system, and central nervous system is the spinal cord in the brain. And starting from the spinal cord, the central nervous system is going to start analyzing the stimulus. And already we can withdraw from the stimulus, or we can approach. Then it's going to go to our conscious mind and going to cause different kind of responses. We can have the skeletal muscle contractions, or we have autonomic nervous system activation, which is sympathetic and parasympathetic system. And then, again, we're either going to have a muscle contraction, or we're going to have some change in our sympathetic or parasympathetic activity. For example, we can have the redness of the skin, we can have increased breathing, we can have increased heart beating, we can have goosebumps, and all those sensations. So again, we never ever ask for increased heart beating. It happens absolutely automatically, and we don't really know how to control it. And that's why many people complain about problems with the heart, and some of them, they have high blood pressure. We cannot do anything. We cannot regulate our own systems. We cannot regulate cardiovascular system, we cannot regulate our digestive system, we cannot regulate our immune system, we cannot regulate nothing. The only thing which we can regulate is our muscle contractions and relaxations, and still it's not all the time. The rest is absolutely automatically regulated. And when the manual therapists work, or any kind of medical doctors who work with patients, what we're trying to do? We're trying to regulate the autonomic activity of different systems. Because normally by nature, unless we've got some genetic problems, we are given a very good systems. They are tuned to work absolutely fine. But because of some changes in the environment and the millions of causes, something could get wrong, and then we have dysfunctions, we have diseases, and we have many problems with our health, meaning adaptation. So, what are the stimulus in manual therapy? Again, touch, pressure, vibration, stretching, compression. For example, when we do the traction in osteopathy, what do? We stretch. Then what stimulus we make in physiotherapy? We apply cold stimulus, vibration, we can treat with ultrasound, we can treat with electrical stimulus. It's the same, it's a stimulation, and then it's going to be a response as a reflex activity. In psychotherapy, we use words, we use images. Again, they're stimulus, and again, we try to adapt the patients by those tools. In pharmacology, we use again, it's cellular signaling, it's inhibition or facilitation of biochemical processes. And all the cells, they respond to signals. All those stimulus would cause a reaction, response. And most of the stimulus are going to cause automatic response. And we call it reflex. So, as we discussed above, reflex is the main activity of central nervous system. And we can define reflex as an involuntary and instantaneous movement in response to any kind of stimulus. How the reflex works, it works by neural pathways. It's reflex arcs and reflex rings, which can act on an impulse before the impulse reaches the conscious mind. So again, this is the stimulus, and the central nervous system reacts before we realize that we get this stimulus. Okay, the role of the reflex is it's basically all our life. It's maintenance of homeostasis, adaptation to the changing environmental stimuli, learning, development. So whatever we do, it's a reflex activity. Okay. In the books, the reflex described in a very easy way, and normally we get a description of monosynaptic reflex. The signal travels to the spinal cord and activates a particular motor neuron, then generate action potential, and the muscle contracts. In reality, reflexes are much more complicated. They cause excitation and inhibition of other segments. For example, if regular monosynaptic reflex go to a certain segment of the spinal cord, it could influence other segments of the spinal cord. It could influence the upper parts of the nervous system, and it could involve and spinal cord and brainstem areas and the brain itself. How the reflex is regulated? First, we get a stimulus, and that's what we normally see in the pictures. But in reality, it's much more complicated. And the stimulus could cause different reflex activity. It could be sensory reflexes, could be vegetative reflexes, it could be muscular reflexes, and then they're going to be regulated on the level of spinal cord, on the suprasegmental levels in the actual brain. It could go to the encephalon, it could go to the mesencephalon, and finally it could reach cortex. So it's much more complicated. So what do the reflexes mean for manual therapy? What is the connection? When the patient comes to our office with pain, with limited range of motions, or with any other symptoms, that means that his reflex regulation is altered. It could be alteration in somatic reflexes, means muscle reflexes. It could be ligament muscle reflexes. It could be homeostatic reflexes, visceral reflexes, emotional reflexes, or cognitive. In most of the cases, the patient comes with a mixture of different disbalanced, altered reflexes. And we need to be able to identify which exactly stimulus and what stimulus cause the problem, why and which reflex systems are affected, what are the compensatory mechanisms, what is the hierarchy of dysfunctions. Because if we have one reflex altered, for example, muscular reflex, then we could have alteration of visceral reflex, we can have ligament muscle reflex alteration, and it's all come in layers of different dysfunctional responses. Then we should be able to diagnose all that and gives proper stimulus to correct the certain issue. And again, what is normal manual therapy treatment and diagnostic? Okay, we can have the visual diagnostic and see, okay, our pelvis is uneven, so we need to pull something here, so it will be better here. But basically, it's absolutely blind approach. In most of the therapies, they don't have biological feedback from the patient, and basically it's a blind approach, and we're guessing. So we have some kind of different diagnostic, like listening, like palpation, and then we guess that maybe it's a problem in this area. And of course we've got like a lot of knowledge about the body, a lot of knowledge about compensations, and based on those knowledge we can assume that yes, the problem is there. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're always right. And that's why many patients come back to our offices with recurrence. Some patients, they get worse, and some patients recover and feel better and say thank you to us. But again, the manual therapy shouldn't be blind, and that's why PDTR is a revolutionary approach in neurophysiology of manual therapy. And then the second problem is, okay, even if we diagnose a problem, how do we treat it? What are our tools for treatment as a manual therapy? We're going to do stimulus, whatever we do. We're going to massage, we're going to, I don't know, set the patient on fire, we're going to put ice on his head, we're going to compress something, we're going to stretch something, or whatever. But again, we're going to apply stimulus. So different diseases, unless it's, okay, genetic problems, we're not talking about infections, we're not talking about viruses, but many dysfunctions and many pain symptoms, they come from maladaptive reflex activities. And that's what we're going to be studying and what we're going to be researching in PDTR. So in a healthy body, the forces which regulate the organism, they are passive. That means that each regulation level works independently, doing its own job. And basically, what is regulation in our body? It's the balance between excitation and inhibition. Then, if any kind of, in any area of the body gets disturbed, and the reflex, the basic and standard reflex regulation, it's not enough to manage this incoming stimulus, then we're going to start to adapt. And what does it mean, the adaptation? It means that the signal, which is excessive, has to be distributed through all other regulation levels. And the signal will force the organism to adapt to its intensivity. Normally, for example, many reflexes are regulated on the level of the spinal segment. And the normal activity is to get the stimulus, to react like withdrawal reflex, any kind of protection reflex, and the stimulus is discharged, meaning the central nervous system was able to deal with the stimulus, and the information doesn't get further. But, for example, if we have trauma, then the local reflex regulation force, it's not enough to deal with the signal. And then we have to add other systems for the regulation. The example of this could be a trading company which has a warehouse which have like different department, marketing, sales, accounting, etc. And there's got a big boss on the top with different managers. And then each day the warehouse receives 100 trucks with the goods. And the warehouse is adapted to this load. And every day they work absolutely independently, so means that warehouse people don't need to ask the managers what can they do. So they have absolutely regulated, organized work. But unexpectedly, 200 trucks arrived. And of course the warehouse is completely lost because they have no idea how to deal with these problems. They don't have a capacity to regulate the incoming stimulus, and another 100 trucks is additional incoming information. And in this case, they have to report to their managers and ask the managers to help dealing with the problem. And of course it's going to go to the top office, and the decision should be made there, how to distribute the excessive force. Exactly the same happening with the central nervous system. And then if the normal reflex activity is not enough to regulate the incoming information, the excessive information should be redistributed among other regulation centers to manage the incoming system. And of course the body will have to adapt to this excessive information. Then we could have another situation when we have a traumatic zone, a trauma, it could be surgery, it could be broken bone, it could be anything. And then this kind of damage would alter the normal reflex activity and will go into the conflict with the general physiological activity of the body. And then this traumatic area would demand the change of the whole regulation of the organism. For example, like if we have strong pain, it changes completely our behavior. We cannot perceive other information if we have pain, we cannot think properly, we cannot think clearly, our attention is completely filled with the pain sensations. And such a conflict could create so-called compensatory distribution of the signal. The compensation could be in another part of the body, and those parts of the body are going to be oversensitive to any kind of stimulation. And then the traumatic afferent field would affect other receptors in surrounding areas. And the compensatory area would act as a barrier between the non-affected zones and affected zones. So the receptors in the connection in traumatic areas would cause the changing in the spinal cord segments where they send the signals. As a result, on the level of spinal cord, we will have a focal overactivity zone which becomes dominant and change the distribution of neuroforces in entire CNS. What does it mean in normal words? In normal words, the trauma is the hypersensitive zone, and if we apply normal touch in the area of trauma, it might cause pain sensations, because now the area is very, very, very sensitive. This is a good picture of proprioception, which is when all our ligaments, muscles and joints send the proper information to the brain. That means all the muscles are working properly and each muscle doing its own proper job. Then the central nervous system is absolutely happy, and as a result we're healthy, we have a good posture, we have a good gait, we're adapted to the exercises, normally we have clear brain, and everything is more or less okay. We are healthy and we can perform in our lives properly. And that's what happens when the proprioceptive information is wrong. It will immediately affect our posture, it will immediately affect our sensations, because we might have pains, we might have limited range of motion, we might have problems with GIT, we might have brain fog sensations, we might not be able to concentrate properly, and many, 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 many other symptoms. Our body is designed to move, and if we take any wild animal, not domestic animals. Some domestic animals are really ugly, created by humans. But if we take the wild animals and we look at them, they're gorgeous. They're absolutely proportional. They don't have any kind of postural problems. All their movements are perfect. They're really, really beautiful. Why? Because they follow the initial design of nature, and they use all the muscles, ligament, joints absolutely properly. They do appropriate movements, and they basically perform their programs, which built in by nature, and that's why they don't have any problems. For the human beings, thanks to our modern lifestyle, we don't move. We stop moving in the 3D planes, so we can move in 2 planes like flexion extension. We hardly do this kind of movements, and that's why our brain gets constant deficit of proprioception information. And normally all the information from proprioception goes in certain areas where it's identified. There are special zones. So for example, imagine like we have 100 stars, and each of the star receives the signal from the muscle. And when it receives the signal, it starts to light the green color. In average human being, we hardly get 60% of that. So the rest we don't move, and our brain don't get the signals from many muscles if we don't move. What happens then? It's called proprioception deficit, and then we can have many dysfunctions. Because if the brain doesn't get the proper sensory information from any part of the body, then it doesn't respond properly. And that means that it's not enough nutrition, not enough oxygenated blood, and not enough lymph drainage, and all this kind of problems. And this of course can cause many dysfunctions. The animals who live in the wild, they're programmed. The human beings initially also programmed, and they have some primary tasks. The main tasks are survival. We need vital space, we need reproduction, we need survival in the social hierarchy, and we need dominance in the society. And those 5 built-in primitive programs, they're key motivation of life and involve motor system activity. What does it mean? It means that whatever we do in life, doesn't matter how our conscious mind explain our behavior, we're going to follow exactly those 5 programs. Whatever we do it for our own survival, we fight for our space, we're trying to reproduce, that's why we're trying to make families, we're trying to have kids. Then it's very important for us what we are in the society, and society hierarchy, where are we? Depending on that, we could have any kind of problems if we're not fulfilling properly one of those programs. Then dominance in society is also very important. So everybody who studies, everybody who wants to be professional, it's also a part of the dominance programs, because the more knowledge we have, the more higher in the hierarchy we are, the more resources we get, the more successful we are, which means for the central nervous system, we are more adapted to the environment where we live in. It doesn't matter what kind of environment is around. If we're in the forest, we're going to do exactly the same thing. And those are built-in programs. They're controlled by hypothalamus, and we cannot change them. We can divert some of the forces. For example, if we have no problems with survival, we can we cannot reproduce, then we move all our forces for the dominance of the society. We can do that way, but if like more than 3 programs fail, we have depression, we have problems, we're not happy with our life, we start drinking, and all these other things which are not great. So we have to talk about evolution of reflexes, because it's very important. It's not, reflexes didn't appear yesterday. They were present, programmed in all the creatures. Starting from the most primitive amoeba, which hasn't got central nervous system, and already she's got simple reaction. She has reaction of avoidance, and she's got reaction of approach to the food. And she can learn the reaction. Actually, amoeba can learn. And if you give electric shock to amoeba, it's going to be withdrawing from this stimulus. And it doesn't have any nervous system at all. Then more complex reaction with more complex creatures. It's called cnidari. Already it's got active reaction, avoidance, so it can escape from the danger. Then it has a choice and it can look for the positive stimulus. It could reject and move away from negative stimulus. And very important, already this animal can avoid the danger before interacting with it. That means that this little thing can learn and predict the possible future, although it's still got no nervous system or primitive nervous system. Then even more complex with the fishes. They already start developing the social links and they have interaction with the community. And they've got complex reaction and they've got multi-level complex reflexes. So one reflex above another one. And they have an active reaction which is overcoming. They can choose how to react on different stimulus. Well, choose means automatically choose. It doesn't have the cortex. In the fishes we can see so-called fractal reflex reactions, where we have multi-level reflex functioning, and one level affects lower level of reflexes. So one afferent stimulus to the fish can change the reflex regulation of the fish in different layers. And it can affect her social behavior, it can affect her withdrawal or avoidance or overcoming behavior. This is absolutely automatic. Fish is programmed and doesn't think. Then we have more complex behavior. And those are the mammals. And their active reaction is adaptation, because they get into the environment which is constantly changing. The change of the season, the change of the food available, and they live already in the society, and they've got many, many complex reflexes, which we can already call a behavior. Behavior is a very complex set of reflexes. Yes, multi-level set of reflexes. And again, they've got adaptation and overcoming. And they get social rules and regulation in the community. So it's also programmed. They fight for hierarchy. They need to survive. They need to reproduce. And they have the leader of the group. Then they change the leader. And they've got very complex social interactions. And apart from self-survival, those animals who live in the group, they think about the group survival. So for them, it's very important to have the babies, to grow the babies, and to grow the population. Then even more complicated. We've got humans. Again, we can see all kinds of reflexes which we have in amoeba, in fishes, in cnidari, in the wolves, in all the species. Plus, we've got the culture, which is just phenomenal of the human being. We've got very, very different hierarchy regulation. And what is the difference between us and all the animals? We can actually modify the conditions around us. We can modify the environment. The animals cannot do. The animals cannot build. The animals cannot make cars. The animals cannot dig the oil from the ground. The animals they do not change the environment. They're part of the environment. With human beings, we have this active task modification of the environment. And then, of course, we've got very complex cultural and religious aspects of behavior, and we need to adapt and overcome all the time. So we've got self-survival task. We're supposed to think about group survival task. We're supposed to think about cultural and religious group survival task. and we're supposed to think about maintenance of certain conditions for survival and dominance within different cultural or religious group. So we can see here the evolution of the nervous system. Again, as we discussed, it starts with basic responses to basic stimulus. Then we get the spinal cord and brainstem regulation, and that's where the complex reflexes are developed. And it's automatization of complex physical systems like respiratory system or cardiovascular system. And then we get the hypothalamus, which is responsible for primal and complex behavior. So before the information reaches the cortex, we have a very, very rich life. Then again, it starts from spinal cord and brainstem, original control, first level of control of the signals. Then we have hypothalamus, basic functions like eat, drink, sex, survival, reproduction, hierarchy, limbic system, and hippocampal system that's involved in emotions and memory. Emotions and memory, it's how we define the stimulus. Is it bad stimulus or is it good stimulus? And then higher cognitive processing, which makes us human. If we think about our nervous system, it's really incredible. This is a slide from King's College University, from our neurophysiology course. And it says that we've got 100 billion of neurons. Each of those 100 billion, each one can have 30,000 connections with other neurons. Each connection can exchange 5,000 pieces of information in 0.3 seconds, 3 milliseconds. And altogether we make like over 1 trillion of connections. It's really incredible. Okay, again, role of reflexes. Homeostasis, meaning survival. On the level of primitive creatures, reflex is survival for like adaptation mechanism, and the little creature learns how to avoid and overcome the stimulus. On the level of invertebrates, avoidance and overcoming, again, is adaptation mechanism. On the level of vertebrates, separation of central nervous system into brain and spinal cord, and that's where we start the complex reflex behavior. It could be called dynamic stereotypes, again as an adaptation mechanism. On the level of human being, all above plus complex regulatory behavior in social groups, influenced by cultural and religious aspects. And adaptation is a complex multi-reflex behavior. Now, what if something goes wrong with reflex activity? The great computer, the great Gear robot, which was designed by nature, doesn't get adapted to the social environment. Oops. Where's the picture? Okay. So some pictures are missing, but that's some causes of human being disadaptation. We can have different surgeries, like if the animal has a trauma in the natural wild environment, it's going to die. There's no chance. If the human being gets injured, it's going to be cured, sent to the hospital, operated, and carry on living. We have car accidents, we have fashion issues, like tattoos, we change our face, we wear high heels, and we have very great variety of conditions where we can alter our reflex activity. For example, like tattoos, they are nociception stimulus, and they normally create withdrawal reflex. We think it's great, but our subconscious nervous system doesn't think so at all, and for unconscious nervous system, it's a big trauma. Well, there were more horrible pictures how we could be disadapted in the society thanks to our cultural issues. Basically, the idea is like that biological tasks of central nervous system programmed by nature is survival, homeostasis regulation, reproduction, etc. Then we have social tasks, which basically anything that's demanded by special social group in different countries, different rules, different religions, also different rules. And sometimes the social tasks in our social life contradicts the biological task and create a conflict which would result in a disease, disadaptation, and an alteration of physiological normal responses. And that's the main cause of many physiological and psychological problems. Normally, as a programmed animals, by nature, we're not supposed to wear shoes, we're supposed to move a lot, we're not supposed to sit, we're not supposed to do anything, many things. But our culture demands that we behave in a certain way, and that goes into the conflict with our biological settings. And that's why our central nervous system cannot adapt very often, and we have problems like different kind of diseases, illnesses, or dysfunctions. The genome of any organism and human beings already carries the optimal variation of the brain cell connection into a single unit. And after this program is implemented as a result of birth and development of the body until reproductive state, all cells in the body are supposed to function properly, except for, again, genetic abnormality. We are designed to function properly. And many neurons, they are genetically programmed to perform optimally in all vital functions and provide optimal communication and therefore optimal going activity. And when the external stimulus is happening, they should get excited, get mobilized, and then they should get back to their normal original level of activity. And this is ideal adaptation, and this is called neurological health. Then, once the external exposure turns on the reaction of the body, which is called stress. In normal condition, the stress is a new way of adaptation. So normally the stress is like additional load to our nervous system. In new conditions, something changed, the central nervous system should change fast, adapt, and survive. But if the external influence exceeds the compensatory potential of nervous system, then we're going to start to have a problem. And in order to support the homeostasis and own regulation, many neurons at this point begin to form additional, non-programmed external relationship with other neighboring neurons in the central nervous system. And they start to create new reflex arches, and new reflexes are formed, and they might not be so great because they're already altered and they're already adapted to the extensive forces which the human body cannot deal with. And we were talking before that the signals should be regulated at each level properly. If one level cannot regulate the reflex properly, then the alteration starts and it's going to result in different kind of dysfunctions. And then if we have this new reflex activity which is altered already, then we're going to have what's called sensitization. And the stimulus, which was absolutely normal before, and we didn't cause any reflex alteration, now would cause big problems. And that's why in PDTR we test all kinds of stimulus, and we see which exactly stimulus caused disadaptation of the reflex systems. We wanted to call this alteration of reflex activity pathological reflexes, but Jose was against of this word pathological, so we use the word altered. And compared to physiological reflexes, which is could be conditional reflexes, which we learned from the childhood, the altered reflex, to form the altered reflex is very fast. You don't need any repetitions. it happens simultaneously. Once there is a dangerous stimulation, you cannot withdraw properly from the stimulus, so meaning that the withdrawal reflex cannot be performed properly, then we get already dysfunction. How does it happen? What is withdrawal reflex? For example, I have the dangerous stim coming from that vector. Normally, I would withdraw like that. To withdraw, I need the muscles and special muscle groups, and some muscles are going to be shortened and they're going to be contracted, and some muscles going to be relaxed to allow me to make a certain movement. If my reflex activity, in this case, for example, stretch reflex activity is normal, and if I can be adapted to this dangerous stimulus, I will withdraw, and then I will come back, and all the muscles will start doing their job properly. So, meaning that they're not going to be over-contracted or over-relaxed. They're going to be normal muscles. But for many reasons, sometimes when we do the withdrawal, and our muscles, for example, here get contracted, and here they're getting relaxed, when I come back, the stretch reflex doesn't work properly. And now I'm going to have a contracted oblique here, and relaxed weak oblique here. The withdrawal muscle pattern would stay. Then, if I have a disbalance of the muscles, what's going to happen? Already, my posture is going to be altered. So I'm going to be like that. Immediately, other muscles are going to compensate for the instability. And if we have one weak muscle in the body, other muscles should work to keep us vertical, so otherwise I will fall down. So we're going to have a total muscle disbalance in the body with the aim to keep vertical position and be able to move. And this is like the first beginning of compensation. If I have a muscle which is really overcontracted, what happens? It's a muscle which is working too much, it's overreactive, it could be shortened, and it could compress, for example, some nerves, some arteries, some veins, which could, and it could affect the whole limb. So already I'm going to start to have pain sensations, I might have an inflammation, I might have ligament problems, I might have lymphatic problems, any kind of problems. And all of that happened just because I wanted to withdraw. Again, it was not conscious withdrawal, it's absolutely automatic. And once I got back to the normal position, the reflex pattern of withdrawal stayed altered. And that's one of the cause of many problems with skeletal-muscular pains. And of course, once I have this stimulus and I had withdrawal, this stimulus would be dominant for me. So each time the same stimulus happen, I'm going to have more and more compensation. And in PDTR, we call it the dominant stimulus, the primary stimulus, which starts the whole cascade of different compensations. And in PDTR, we have to find it. As soon as we find it and we change the central nervous system reaction to the stimulus, immediately all the muscles become absolutely normal, and that means that we're going to solve the problem with the inflammation, with nerve compression, or with any other functional problems with which many patients come to see us. And this is a big difference between PDTI approach and manual therapy approach. We don't massage without reason. We don't press without reason. We don't touch without reason. We know what we're going to touch, why we're going to touch, what's going to be the reaction, and we can predict different level of responses of the body. Okay. Oh, this is also a nice picture. How we develop many problems. So we start with this, because if you put dampers on the kid, it's bad. If the kid has got excessive pronation, it's bad. This is alters all the muscular ligament reflexes, and we have many problems. The teeth, big problem, traumas, and the brainwash which we get from the society as well. Now, this is just an example of pathological dynamic stereotypes. Again, the culture wants us to sit on these chairs, to sit in this position, to watch the screen. Then we have, of course, problems. Then we have to be beautiful and attract, so we try to attract, but it goes absolutely against our biological mechanism, because our father didn't create us, didn't supply the high heels. He thought we're going to walk on the ground without shoes, because the shoes were not provided at birth. Okay, we've got more complex pathological reflexes. For example, as you can see on the picture, we don't withdraw just from any kind of nociception stimulus. When somebody is shouting at us, we have exactly the same withdrawal, and normally we've got, our nervous system doesn't have any solution with the adults who shout at us. The nervous system of the kid can perform two actions: to kill the attacker or to run away. There are two options programmed by our central nervous system how we can react. When adults they shout at the kids, modern kids, they cannot react, because if he starts attacking the adult, it's going to be even worse, and he cannot run away because the adult will not permit him to do that. And that's why the kids, they get stuck in a situation where they're paralyzed and they cannot get into the flight or fight response, which is one of the most important responses of our sympathetic nervous system. And that's where they get a lot of dysfunctions. They can get postural dysfunctions, they can get visceral dysfunctions, and their reflex activity is going to be altered. So after these kind of things, the image, the memory of the situation could be a stimulus to inhibit many muscle and get a trauma doing some other activities. This is very, very important. Then another example, now it's very fashionable to complain about food intolerance. And people now are intolerant to everything. That has some common sense, because today we eat food which is not really biologically safe, because we don't know where it's grown, and we have antibiotics added in the food, and we have some kind of preservative added to the food. But real intolerance, where we don't have enzymes to digest certain proteins or certain substances, is very rare. It's about 5%. The rest is so-called functional food intolerance. As we talked before, when somebody is eating the bread, so eating the food is nice, positive stimulus for the central nervous system. And once we eat the food, the parasympathetic system works, so we have digestive system working, and this kind of relaxed state. Well, if at the same time somebody is going to be doing any kind of dangerous and aggressive stimulus, then the central nervous system is going to get into conflict between sympathetic and parasympathetic activity. And it could create the wrong association that bread is dangerous. Of course, it's going to happen absolutely unconsciously. And then in certain while, the kid or even the adult, he will start eating food and he will feel bad. All of those stimulus, loud voice, horrible gestures, they are aversive, dangerous, negative stimulus. The system's trying to withdraw. At the same time, you put in the mouth positive stimulus and you force the digestive system to work. It's a conflict. It's inconsistency of and incongruence of two systems, and that creates a neurological conflict which might result in food intolerance. It might result in, for example, urine incontinence or in something else. But in many cases, because it's traditional when somebody is eating to say something horrible to him, and he can get this kind of altered reflexes very easily. Then compensatory mechanisms. Compensation is always possible at the cost of additional resources of the body. It's like a load management issue. If the limb cannot perform an action by any reason, the load of the body is going to be redistributed through other joints, through other ligaments, and other structures will have to work harder to maintain the balance. And this decentralization would affect all systems. So when we compensate something which doesn't work, we compensate it with over-facilitation. For example, like muscles, if some muscles don't work, other muscles should work harder. And that, as we talked before, could cause many different dysfunctions. With time, compensations leads to decompensation. So we can compensate. We can load our systems until a certain moment where our body said, that's it, that's enough, I cannot compensate anymore. And very often the areas of the pain are the areas where the system cannot, unless it's a fresh tissue damage, it's the area which cannot be really compensated anymore. Could be one of those. And if our central nervous system exhausts and cannot compensate anymore, then we're going to have diseases, traumas, pain sensations, limited range of motions. Then we could have immune system decrease, so we can be exposed to viruses, to bacteria, to basically any kind of problems. So what are the consequences of altered reflex activity? Pain, limited range of motion, pathological ontologic postures, dynamic stereotypes, metabolic problems, visceral problems, biochemical problems, emotional problems, general disadaptation of the organism, like problems with development, with learning, with information processing, depressions, all kind of mental disorders, cognitive social problems, and mixed polymodal problems. So that's the list of problems with which patients come normally to our office and to the office of any manual therapy practitioner. So how would we deal with that? Are we going just to compress somewhere, or we try to find out what's happening and what kind of reflex activities is involved? That's now our choice. Okay, now it's a bit complicated with words, but I think it's important to say about different kind of reflex systems which could be affected. We have somatosomatic reflexes, means muscle ligament reflexes, somatovisceral reflexes, muscle organs, viscerosomatic reflexes, organ muscles, visceral reflexes, organ, then organ skins, then emotion muscles, emotion organs, and many combination of these reflexes. So what is the most important in PDTR? All this, any kind of stimulus and any kind of reflexes could affect the most basic stretch reflex, which is used in manual muscle testing, and this reflex is called myotatic reflex. It's just a stretch reflex, and it's the reflex which is described in all the books. The sensors which sense the length of the muscle, they send the signal, and as a result the muscle contracts. So all those altered reflexes could cause the alteration of stretch reflex. Now we start with somatic reflexes. Somatic reflexes involve muscles, and it involves muscles in muscle contraction in return to a certain stimuli. Those reflexes are controlled by spinal cord, and they don't reach conscious mind. So example, it's a stretch reflex. So when we have the dangerous stimulus, we have withdrawal. This is a stretch reflex working. Then we have stimulus from ligament, joint, capsules. They also would affect associated muscles and stimulate their contraction or inhibition. Meaning that in the wrist, if I stretch the capsula, then I'm going to affect associated muscles. If I stretch the acromial ligament, I'm going to affect associated muscles. If I'm going to stretch ligament flavum, I'm going to affect associated muscles. Those are very important because if the ligament sends an excessive signal, then we're going to have the problem with the associated muscles. Somatic reflexes, they occur when somatic stimuli produce patterns of reflex activity of segmentally related somatic structures. For example, neurons in the spinal cord, they may receive abnormal level of afferent activity from muscle spindles as a result of the injury. Segmentally related somatic fibers may then stimulate muscle fibers, resulting in tightness and pain. So, again, if we had a trauma and it affected our muscle spindles, the sensors which are responsible for stretching, then we're going to have excessive signal on the level of spinal cord, and then the motor innervation to the muscle will going to be also excessive. It could cause spasm or pain sensations. So somatosomatic reflexes, they happen when the stimuli is applied to somatic structure. The afferent signal goes to a spinal segment and result in muscle contraction. The stimuli can be nociceptive of nature and cause withdrawal reflex by group of muscles. For example, touching a hot object and the arm withdraws. Also, if we detect a mosquito, we're going to slap. It's also a somatic reflex. So, somatosomatic reflex could be postural or protective. Ligament muscular reflexes I described very well, and in the end of the presentation there is a big literature reference list where you can read the articles about what we just talked about. Now, visceral reflexes. These come from sensory input in viscera, so from organs, and signal travel from the organ to the spinal cord and produce a response in sympathetic or parasympathetic system. Of course, it's also unconsciously. So, for example, distension of the GIT results in the contraction of the GIT muscle. For example, we have vomiting, we have vagal vagus reflex, we have enterogastric reflexes, we have enterocolic reflexes, and so on. All those reflexes regulates the production of fluoric acids, they regulate the production of enzymes, they regulate peristaltis, and basically they regulate all the GIC system. Visceral reflexes occur when localized visceral stimuli produce pattern of reflex activity if segmentally related visceral structures. For example, we can have preganglionic autonomic neurons in the spinal cord, and they might receive any kind of activity from the viscera. They may excite postganglionic autonomic neurons, sympathetic efferents, which may result in undesirable immobilization of the intestines, for example, after the surgery. So again, the logic is the same. Excessive stimulus from the organ can reach the certain regulatory centers, and we can have a response, like for example, a spasmatic GIT system, like we could have pain in the stomach, we could have pain in the intestines, or something like that. Then visceral somatic reflexes, it's when the stimulus from the viscera affect the muscles, so from organs to muscles, and actually that was shown very well in the end of 19th century by a great Russian researcher, Yasechenov, and when he was extracting the stomach from the dogs, he noticed that their pectoralis muscles were really, really weak, and the dog couldn't stand properly, it was falling down. And that was first associations between organs and muscles. Also, referred pain from organs, we can have myocardial infarction pain in the left shoulder. This is nociception stimuli from myocardium, would affect the motor neuron which supplies the shoulder muscles. and of course we have many articles which described referred pain. Somatovisceral reflexes is when somatic structures, muscle structures, influence and alter visceral functions. So, for example, signal from muscles or ligaments or joints can travel to the spinal cord, brainstem, and could cause a cascade of activity to autonomic motor neurons. Trauma and pain causes an autonomic reflex response. We can have a trauma, then the signal travels to cortex, then we get really scared, then we have problems with our GIT, spasm, and any kind of problems with digestive system. Then we've got viscerocutaneous reflexes. That's when the organ influences the skin reflexes. And for example, we can have preganglionic autonomic neurons in the spinal cord. They may receive, again, afferent activity from the intestines as a result of, for example, gastritis. And then we have postganglionic fibers in the sympathetic tract, and it might stimulate cutaneous receptors, resulting in dilation of blood vessels, and we're going to notice the redness of the skin. Cutaneovisceral reflexes. That's the other way around, then the problem from the skin could affect the organs. So we have, like it says here, segmentally related postganglionic fibers in abdominal ganglia may inhibit intestinal motion caused by pathologies such as gastritis, reducing pain caused by convulsive contractions. This is again the distribution of the signal in the spinal cord, and in PDTR we're going to study it very, very carefully, so we can see that we can have reaction from skeletal muscles, we can have reactions from viscera, we can have reaction from the skin, and we have a motor response in different ways. Okay. This is just to give a basic idea mostly for osteopath people and for chiropractors, because in osteopathy there were many studies about how the afferent stimulus from somatico-visceral structures could affect the reflex regulation. So we know that all afferent stimulus, they go through the dorsal horn to the spinal cord. Then the spinal gray matter is divided into 10 layers, rexid layers. And we already discussed that we have large fibers and small fibers, fast fibers and slow fibers, the fibers which carry sensation from muscle ligaments and other proprioceptive structures, and we have nociception fibers which carry the signals about the damage. So large fibers normally go into lamina 3 and 4. Laminas are filters which are going to deal with the signal. Nociceptive fibers, both somatic and visceral, go into laminas 1, 2, 5, 7, and 10. In layers 1 and 5, it could be overlap between somatic and visceral nociception. So that's why we very often we have problems and altered reflex regulation in somatic and visceral structures. And of course we can read about it very clearly in the articles of the neurologists who study those things. Now, when in laminas 1 and 5, the motor and visceral afferent flow, they interfere, it can cause alteration of viscerosomatic and somatovisceral reflexes, as we said before. The excitation at one segment could spread onto another segment and influence the sensitivity of associated receptor fields in different zones of the body. Meaning that if we get the signal in one segment of the spinal cord and then it cannot be regulated there, then the signal is going to spread to other cords, going to involve visceral fibers, somatic fibers, and could create many different altered reflex activities. In PDTR we talk about fractals, about different layers of dysfunctions, and we could have, like on the top, we could have the example, visceral reflex affected, and underneath is going to be somatic reflex affected. And we need to find the priority system which is not working, treat the system, find the proper stimulus what affected and alter the reflex regulation, and then the whole cascade of the dysfunction is going to be sorted out. Meaning we're not going to have pain and limited range of motion. Okay, then once the stimulus travels from peripheral system, as soon as it gets to first order neuron, we're going to start to have chemical regulation of the signal. And sometimes we have a lack of neurotransmitter between two neurons, and sometimes we have an excessive amount of neurotransmitter. And in manual muscle testing, we talk about hyperreflexive muscles and hyperreflexive muscles. So this is to do with the chemical regulation of the level of spinal cord, and it's going to influence the result of the testing. So when we've got dysfunction mode, meaning altered reflex, a trauma, excessive input from any receptor field, inflammation, all kind of system can be altered and cause long-term sensitization or long-term inhibition. Those processes preclude the excitability of the neural pathway from returning to normal and disrupt the normal integration of physiological function. Again, when we have sensitization or long-term inhibition, meaning excessive amount of glutamate produced for a long time, we have a problem, and then we have a lack of glutamate, we have a problem. Change in reflex function can be caused by nociception stimulus and non-nociception stimulus. The signal from ligament, which is not normally it's a proprioceptive signal, it should not cause any pain. It could become a nociceptive stimulus. That's why when people talk about trigger points or when they stimulate the ligament, it's painful. That's where the stimulus, which shouldn't be really painful, becomes painful, and that's due to the mixture of the signals in the spinal cord. And altered excitation can stay for an indefinite amount of time, so that's why we have chronic pains. There are 4 steps to alter the reflex regulation. Again, normally the stimulus comes in, should be regulated on this special level of spinal segment, discharged, dealt with, and discharged completely, and going back to the normal reflex activity. Then we have altered reflex when we have sensitization, long-term sensitization, loss of old interneurons inhibitory synapses, and formation of new excitatory synapses in various segments, which leads to a long-term dysfunction and prolonged compensation. In this step, the new pathological somatosomatic and somatovisceral reflexes would be created. This is exactly the explanation of the chronic pain, exactly the explanation of the posture changes, the explanation why we have some visceral problems, and so on. So, as we could see, the stimulus could cause a cascade of reflex reactions. And sometimes we have the altered reflex activities. Once it happens, many systems will have to compensate the aberrant signal using the additional resources of the organism and redistributing the forces. As a result, we could have decompensation and afterwards structural damages. The damage starts with function alteration, compensation, and in time resources in the body will exhaust and will cause structural damages. So what is the pain sensation? We perceive pain consciously. We have unpleasant sensation. So it's a conscious interpretation of incoming sensory input. So our senses will send us a signal which we interpret as unpleasant. Pain will always activate our arousal. Arousal means that our reticular formation is excited, and we pay much more attention to the pain sensation. It needed so we can deal with pain. Pain sensation can occur with or without skin damage. Pain could be of somatic and visceral origin. Pain sensation, strong pain sensation, will inhibit another sensory flow and can dominate as a sensation, and all the conscious attention would be focused on the pain sensation. And of course we cannot act properly when we have pain. And of course pain could cause a brain fog. Pain is needed initially to inform the conscious mind of a danger, of a trauma, of a damage. Today we have, as we talked before, general sensitization, when we become sensitive, too much sensitive to many different stimulus, which normally don't cause any pain sensation. And we have chronic pains, and sometimes people come to the office and they complain about chronic pains, but the tests don't show any structural damage whatsoever. So it could be a very local inflammation somewhere, or it could be just an excessive sensory input which is interpreted by central nervous system as pain, although there is no damage. And this very bad picture of the pain. So the causes of altered reflex activity, traumas, and that could include any surgeries, broken limbs, strong impact falls, tattoos, piercings, spot injuries, birth traumas, etc. Infections, any sufficient change in internal homeostasis. It could be emotional issues, stress, social disadaptation, kids' traumas. Chemicals, problems with teeth, malocclusion, implants, missing teeth. Could be visceral problems, digestion problems. It could be food, there's excessive sugar intake. It could be, of course, structural impairments like tumors, nerve damages, etc. Structural damages and problems, it's not the subject for PDTR therapy. PDTR does not treat tumors, it doesn't treat broken bones, it doesn't normally treat autoimmune diseases, cancer, etc. So, now we're going to talk about all the manual therapies, and again, the question, after all we were discussing here, what do we do? Okay, what do we do in osteopathy? We do some cranial protocols, we have a lot of visceral stimulation, we try to pull the ligaments, the organs, and they're displaced, but in the end of the day, how do we treat? We put the hands, we do the stimulus. So we exactly apply the stimulus and expect the reflex reaction. Then what we do in chiropractic we crack. The actual spinal fixation is a protection which is created by the central nervous system, for example, to protect the organs or to protect just different part of the body. So when we do cracking and when we adjust, again, we stim certain ligaments, or we stim certain joints, and again, we do the stimulation. In applied kinesiology, we use manual muscle testing, which is a great feedback tool. And of course, in manual muscle testing, we don't test the strength of the muscle, we test the reflex, and we test the intensivity of the reflex. And in particular, we test the myotatic reflex, which is a stretch reflex, and we test the hyperreflexive muscles, hyperreflexive muscles, and nomatonic muscles. The idea of applied kinesiology, and which completely matches the physiological idea of reflex regulation, that in a healthy body, the reflex activity is absolutely healthy without any kind of alteration. So the myotatic reflex is an indicator for us if there is some things going in the body. Then, of course, many people say it's not reliable, we cannot use it, nothing's been proven. We just talked about the reflex activity for 2 hours, 16 minutes and 37 seconds, and we see very, very clearly that any kind of change in myostatic reflex would result in disturbance of the posture, it results in the vertical position, it results in altered dynamic stereotype. So testing the stretch reflex is absolutely logical. The only thing we need to do it properly, we need to understand what we test, how we test, and of course I'm going to recommend the neurological manual muscle testing by Jose Polamar, where it's 1 hour video where he explains how we test the muscles, why we test the muscles like that, and then we've got a very nice video with common mistakes in manual muscle testing, and I think it's a very good tool. They're very good tools. Normally, all those therapies, they don't consider the reflex activity. They consider they consider many things, but they don't test the reflex systems, which is the source of the pathology. In PDTR, there is a concept of neurological health, and PDTR is based on neurophysiological principles which were confirmed and discovered in 19th, 20th century. And what's exciting about PDTR, that we can apply the rules and principles of neurology into the manual practice. And that's why it's an absolutely incredible tool. It's a unique system, unique approach, because we cannot find anything similar on the market. It's absolutely new approach, a pioneer approach, and of course it needs a lot more research in different fields, but the concept itself is very interesting, and of course we work with patients every day and we prove on practice on ourselves that it works absolutely great. Of course it's not the solution for all kinds of diseases, but it could treat many dysfunctions and many problems. Now we have to go back to the manual muscle testing. There is an article in the PDTR global page where you can read about it, about manual muscle testing, about the responses of the muscle testing, about the myostatic reflex. Any kind of stimulus could affect manual muscle testing response, or stretch reflex. So any kind of proprioceptive stimulus, so any stimulus from locomotor system, signals from ligament will affect the stretch reflex, and it's sometimes it's a normal protection response. For example, like stretching a joint capsule will inhibit the stretch reflex globally. Then visceral stimulus will affect the stretch reflex. Sensory stimulus will affect the stretch reflex. Emotion stimulus will affect stretch reflex. And we talked about all the somatosomatic and visceral reflexes before. Peri-receptor fields theory. This is the original theory of Dr. Jose Polamar. He proposed that we have paired receptors field. And we actually did the study with electromyography to try to identify and confirm the pairing areas. So what is the receptor field, dysfunctional receptor field? It's basically the area of the body which is very sensitive. So normal threshold, for example, is going to be minus 50 millivolt to start the action potential, and probably those areas they have minus 45 millivolt. So they're very sensitive to stimulus, and they react to the normal stimulus. They react like it was a nociception stimulus or dangerous stimulus or damaging stimulus. And as soon as we have one area of the body with excessive sensitization, immediately the central nervous system creates some other areas with hypersensitization. They're also going to be sensitive to the stimulus, but the signal activity is going to be a little less than from the primary zone. And those additional sensory areas would be created to compensate the excessive stimulation, the excessive sensitization from this primary zone. We measured with electromyography and we tried to repeat the rules which Dr. Palamar developed, and we initially confirmed that his rules works, and you can read about the research report. It's on the global web page. You can see it there. So what is the basis of PDTR theory? Afferent information can affect physiological reflex activity at any level. What does it mean? Any stimulus could cause altered reflex activity. Afferent information could cause pathological motor, sensory, vegetative, or cognitive responses. Time is unlimited. That's what we talked about before. Again, the stimulus can create a cascade of different reactions in the body. Afferent information can affect local reflexes, it could affect dynamic stereotypes and functional systems. We didn't talk about functional system, but basically it's a part of very complex behavior. Dynamic stereotypes, it's our learned locomotor patterns which we use every day, like running, walking, different kind of exercises. Excessive afferent information would cause compensatory reaction at the cost of additional resources of the organism. We talked about compensations, and that slowly they can become decompensations. And once they become decompensations, we're going to have pain sensations and different negative symptoms. There is always a dominant stimulus in excessive afferent information flow, which could be of any modality. For example, we receive hundreds of different stimulus at the same time. If we have a dysfunction caused by a stimulus, it's going to be a particular stimulus out of all of them. For example, we had sound, we had an image, we had touch, we had pressure, and we had something else. So only one stimulus is going to be dominant. And this stimulus would not be compensated properly by central nervous system. It would cause a compensation and dysfunction. Any excessive afferent information would create a specific muscle pattern where the stretch reflex is altered. So as we discussed with withdrawal reflex, it's going to be an inhibition pattern, so we could define which kind of muscle are inhibited, means they have hypoactive stretch reflex, and we can define why they're inhibited and what to do to restore the activity. Again, PDTR altered reflexes. Simple altered reflex would affect just segmental level of regulation and affect muscles which are regulated by these segments, ligaments or joint. It could cause various pain symptoms, limited range of motion. Complex altered reflexes would involve simple reflexes, pathology, and vegetative component as well. More complex, we're going to have change of the emotions, change in the behavior, visceral problems, again, the whole mixture of different reflex activities. Fractal of altered reflexes, it's a complex functional system which is multi-layers. It's compensation over compensation, because the duration of excessive stimulus can last for ages. And we are very strong. Our nervous system can compensate for years. And that's why we have fractals and layers of dysfunctions, which are like a Russian doll, one, like we have small dolls and a bigger doll, matryoshka. So, what do we do in PDTR? We use manual muscle testing. we use neurological manual muscle testing, which is a variation of classical muscle testing, which was created by Dr. Receptor himself. Then we're going to do a diagnostic of afferent components, so we're going to check the stimulus. We're going to check the motor response. We're going to diagnose the segments, so the levels where signal is regulated. We're going to diagnose the suprasegmental levels, so that's higher levels of regulation. We're going to diagnose complex reflexes, dynamic stereotypes, functional systems, and find the priority problem, find the certain inhibition patterns, and will remove the problem. So the concept of neurological health in PDTR, for us, one of the main rules in PDTR that the practitioner should be healthy himself. Because if I'm a practitioner and I'm brain fog, then I will not do any good to my patients. That's why it's absolutely necessary for the practitioner itself to be healthy on all the levels. And neurological health concept says that if the body can manage all the afferent information, meaning all the stimulus from the external and internal environment, can adapt to that, then it's a healthy body. And of course we're going to have the good posture, we're going to have full range of motion, we're going to be aware of ourselves, stable moods, mental clarity, we're going to be adapted to any incoming information, we can cope with everyday's life, we have a lot of energy, we don't really get tired, and many positive things. So neurological disadaptation could include pain symptoms, reduced mental activity, reduce of mental clarity, confusion, slow processing of information, attention and concentration problems, poor focusing, poor memory recall, unable to make a clear decision, self-pitiness, emotional impulses, poor rational thinking, anger, automatic emotional reaction, general emotional instability, irrational behavior, intellectual lethargia, loss of interest in many activities, change of mood, low self-esteem and motivation. So all of those we could be treated also by PDTR, by the same rules, and the excessive stimulation from outside would cause all of that. It's not just because you're a bad person and bad character, no. The reason could be neurophysiological, and they could be connected just with excessive stimulus from any kind of sources. So, to finish our presentation, we can say that, again, repeat that PDTR therapy demonstrates the principles of neurophysiology discovered and published 100 years ago. PDTR therapy is a know-how techniques based on main neurophysiological principles of central nervous system. PDTR could effectively restore normal reflex functioning and fix altered dynamic stereotypes and altered functional systems. PDTR therapy increases the compensatory limits of the central nervous system. And this is important to mention, because when manual therapists say, okay, we treat, we don't really treat. We increase the compensatory capacity and compensatory limits of central nervous system, because we every day were exposed to life, and the life is changing every day, and we could have traumas, we can have bad events in our life, we can have different changes all the time. We are completely unstable, and we are exposed to different negative and traumatic effects. So we need to have enough compensatory capacity to be able to adapt to all those kind of changes. So PDTR increases the compensatory limits of central nervous system. What PDTR actually does is it breaks the wrong neural connections in the reflex arches by eliminating the dominant stimulus and remove the need to use compensatory mechanism. So the nervous system compensates because there is an excessive stimulation. As soon as we remove the excessive stimulus, we don't need to compensate anymore, and the regulation levels can manage their own work properly. And PDTR method is based on classical approach to the reflex activity, simple and complex, and services to provide better adaptation to the environment, learning, overcoming, adaptation, condition modification in normal conditions and in pathology. PDTR reflex theory could explain the effect of other manual therapy techniques. That's what they think. Of course, we need much more research, and we hope that other researchers from other manual therapies, they would consider the theory of PDTR, and we could research together. And we've got a list of symptoms and syndromes which PDTR work with. It's quite a lot. So for the student, okay, Dr. Palmer says that PDTR is also easy. In PDTR it's very important that we constantly learn the anatomy, we learn biomechanics, we learn neurophysiology. We have to learn manual muscle testing and practice a lot to be able to test well. It takes about 2 years to become a really, really good practitioner with the experience. To be a good practitioner, we need to get certified, meaning it's practical and theoretical test with Jose Palomar. And I think that's it. That was the introduction to PDTR. Thank you for watching.